Welcome to the third part of my Scott Pilgrim analysis series. In this video we'll be doing a brief breakdown of the themes of Book 3, Scott Pilgrim and the Infinite Sadness. Before we begin, I want to offer a quick spoiler warning. This video will expect that you've at least read the entire series before, as we'll be referencing the books before and after this one in our analysis. If you haven't, please do read them, then come back to this video. Without further ado, let's get started. For a retrospective series, I haven't been doing much retrospecting, have I? I like to let my analysis take center stage, but I figured it would be fun to take a quick detour and unpack my feelings with this particular volume. Picking a favorite volume from a large spanning epic can be difficult, especially when those volumes contribute equally to the story. If I had to set those concerns aside and pick one book to be my favorite, I'd have to choose the third volume. In a lot of ways, The Infinite Sadness is the perfect showcase of what makes Scott Pilgrim special. I think my favorite thing about this volume has to be its pacing. In many ways, it lives up to the retro game meets shonen anime concept the first two books helped to establish. This pacing owes a lot to the addition of the big show at the end. This plot detail gives a sense of urgency to the pacing, as Scott has to balance preparing for the show and surviving Envy's challenges. There's also something very fun about Envy acting as an arbiter for the challenges. Just the thought of her devising rigged battles for Scott to lose is too much fun. It's interesting that this structure isn't used more for the rest of the X's. Outside of the fights, the story also balances itself out with contemplative scenes where we explore the pasts of these characters. There's a good balance of quiet moments and bombastic moments. The first two books were far more quiet, with really one major fight at the end. On the opposite spectrum, the last three books are far more frantic with tons of fights and major lore drops. I don't mind this discrepancy. I just think it's cool that Book 3 gets to be the best of both worlds. This is the midpoint of the series, where the story takes the time to reflect on the past and lay the foundations for the future. The actions of many characters are enforced by their past, how their hurt and trauma define them and dictate their roles. At the same time, their actions become mirrors into who they will become in the future, how they'll fall, and how they will succeed. For instance, Todd's behavior and attitude reflects Scott's in Book 1. It also reflects how his relationship with Ramona erodes in Book 5 and 6. Scott being able to disable Envy during her fight with Ramona reflects on how Scott succeeds in future books, by holding on to hope for a better future and facing his faults rather than taking the easy way out. Finally, Knives makes stronger efforts to not let Scott's rejection define her. Envy is invested in Scott's defeat, as Scott winning means Todd and her music career going away. Her rivalry might also have to do with retribution. Likely from her perspective, Scott represents inertia or stagnation. In her mind, she was unable to truly rise to her greatest potential with him in her life. Scott's laissez-faire attitude about the band might have been the catalyst for their breakup, as she might have had an emotional attachment to creating music. It might also extend to their relationship in general. Why does she shut down when Scott professes his love for her? Is it because Todd's back in her life and she's cheating on him? Maybe it's his lack of confidence in how he walks back the proclamation. Maybe it's his pensiveness that makes her question their relationship. It makes her attachment to Todd make more sense as he seems more devoted and genuine, or he's very good at seeming so. Envy could also just be authoritarian, clinical, or even evil. I think back to a particular flashback where Envy is confused as to why Scott would write a song for her, unless it's specifically for a band. This contrasts with the moment in Book 2 where Ramona is genuinely happy Scott writes a song for her. This is an otherwise boring reading, as we have ample evidence that Scott is a doo-doo head. Analyzing other characters is challenging when the narrative is strictly in Scott's perspective. Envy sends a shockwave of insecurity throughout the cast. She acts as a high standard that no one can seem to obtain. She dictates how the cast view themselves in different ways. Scott and Knives become unsure of their worth as people. The returning memories of his rejection erode Scott's self-worth. Envy's presence reminds Scott of the uphill battle to overcome his aching loneliness. She also indirectly affects the confidence of other characters as well. She causes Kim to question her appearance and capacity for romance alongside Stefan's musical talent. Wallace is the inverse to Envy. He shows concern for others and becomes a force of encouragement. This includes informing Scott that his past doesn't define him and cheering Ramona on during her fight with Envy. Everyone sees the fame and prestige and becomes humbled, but Wallace knew Envy before she became all of that. Envy and her crew dissolve due to their weakened bonds. They may have fame, but they lack the true connection Scott and his friends have with each other. Another facet of this volume that deserves praise is the implementation of Todd Ingram. While all the other exes are lovable in their own way, Todd feels like more of a fleshed out character. While many of the other exes act as final tests for Scott, Todd gets to be more than that. He gets to be a character who gets examined and critiqued as much as the rest of the cast in this book. In Book 3, Todd serves as a stronger and dumber echo of Scott. He inherits and amplifies Scott's strengths and weaknesses. For example, Scott is a truly strong fighter, while Todd draws his power from a discipline he's ultimately unable to maintain due to his ignorance and pride. While Scott can be considered an ignorant or prideful person on occasion, it rarely seems to undermine his combat abilities as much as it does for Todd. Todd seemingly is all-confident, but has to constantly remind everyone around him how competent he is. Scott can be overconfident at times, but this overconfidence blinds him from his faults. Todd constantly reminding everyone of his superiority almost reads like he's too cognizant of his inadequacies. In some ways, Scott's confidence in himself is more genuine than Todd's. Todd lacks the capacity for compassion and the intelligence to hide his deception. He wants the admiration of everyone around him, but is also quick to disregard the emotional hurt of others when things become challenging. Around the middle of the book, Lynette refers to Todd as incorrigible. It means to be incapable of being corrected or unruly. This nails Todd's biggest flaw. He lacks discipline. He is otherwise unable to change and grow as he doesn't value his relationships of his past and present. Envy represents the misery of the past and the misconception of its inevitability. She makes everyone around her feel inadequate. Both Envy and Todd act as unobtainable standards. However, their prestige is founded on artificial confidence, and their entire empire crumbles when their egos and resentment for each other caves in. This is in contrast to the genuine confidence that the cast develops in spite of these lofty expectations. The cast is able to rise above their insecurities and find a true confidence in themselves, alongside a hope for a brighter future.